Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unlocking something pretty incredible. We're diving into an exclusive, high-level strategic playbook used by global organizations like the UN. Think of this as a deeply important internal toolkit, one that's specifically designed to guide senior leaders in driving massive systemic change. And look, this isn't just high-in-the-sky theory. We're talking about the actual tactical communication tools used on the ground to tackle literally one of the most critical challenges any institution can face.
What is SEA, and why should I care? You might be surprised, but according to our source text, these are the exact questions frequently asked by personnel, partners, government officials, and even donors. By the way, SEA stands for Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. When key stakeholders are asking these kinds of questions, it reveals a pretty dangerous knowledge gap. It shows us that people often just don't understand the absolute urgency of preventing SEA, or the vital role they play in supporting those efforts. So as a leader, your very first hurdle, overcoming that exact gap.
So, the crucial point is this. While you're definitely going to encounter resistance or misunderstanding along the way, a senior leader's influential position is the ultimate solution. Your voice has this entirely unique power. If you leverage it correctly, it can drive essential organizational reforms. It's the key to stripping away the secrecy and the shame that so often surround the issue of sexual exploitation and abuse. Plus, it ensures that funding and resources are actually made available to solve the problem.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the leadership platform. Second, actions for senior leaders. Third, tailoring the message. And finally, we'll wrap up with some strategic advocacy tips. Let's jump in. Starting right off with Section 1, the leadership platform and how we overcome that knowledge gap. High-stakes communication really starts with the decision-maker recognizing the sheer weight of their own platform. You simply can't enact change if you don't realize the power of the microphone you're holding, right? Listen to this mandate straight from the playbook. If you get it right, your voice can drive essential organizational reforms and ensure a safe, transparent, timely, and effective response. That is a seriously powerful mandate. We're taking an issue that historically hides in the shadows, and we're using leadership to demand a totally transparent, timely response that upholds the rights of victims and survivors.
Moving right along to Section 2. Actions for senior leaders. Basically, stepping up to the plate.
All right, so what does stepping up actually look like on a Tuesday morning? Well, this is the core, actionable breakdown of what the playbook requires leaders to do day in and day out to make prevention a reality. It outlines 5 distinct steps. First up, know your context and priorities. Really dig into your local action plans and staff surveys. Second, elevate those core standards by championing the absolute zero-tolerance policy. Third, tailor your messages to your specific audience. Now pay really close attention to this fourth one. Create safe spaces for dialogue. Whether it's a massive town hall or a private bilateral meeting, you have to foster trust. You do that by leading by example, setting crystal clear ground rules, and really encouraging non-judgmental listening. And finally, step 5 is taking a strategic approach, meaning you plan out your advocacy objectives before you ever even step foot in the room.
Next up, Section 3, tailoring the message. We're looking at one policy, but applied to entirely different audiences.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast in approach. We have one overarching policy, zero tolerance, but how we actually communicate it has to shift dramatically depending on who is sitting across the table. When a leader's speaking to UN personnel, the message is incredibly strict and rule-based. You reiterate zero tolerance, mandatory reporting, and you make it clear that failure to report is straight-up misconduct. But look at the other side. When communicating with victims and survivors, the entire tone pivots. The playbook absolutely requires a trauma-informed approach here. You have to convey deep empathy, offer honest, realistic support, and make sure any dialogue happens in a space where they feel completely comfortable. It's the exact same ultimate goal, but you're using completely different communication tools.
Let's dive into how this looks in the actual field toolkit. If you look at 203 from the manual, specifically the section for local communities, it's pretty amazing. The playbook gives leaders very specific, tangible examples of what to say. It tells them to remind communities that protection and assistance are always free, and that personnel can never, ever request favors in exchange for that assistance. It literally scripts out the message for them. You have rights. You have the right to report any case without fear of retaliation. Having it scripted like that ensures the message stays crystal clear right down to the grassroots level.
And it doesn't stop there.
The matrix keeps adapting. When leaders are talking to donors, for instance, the playbook instructs them to pivot and focus on transparency, showing how resources are being used wisely to maximize prevention efforts. But then, when addressing the media, the focus shifts again, this time to strict accountability and openly acknowledging risk factors, like how situations of crisis or forced displacement create the highest risks for exploitation. Honestly, the toolkit leaves nothing to chance. Every single audience gets a perfectly tailored, highly strategic approach.
I want you to listen really closely to this specific messaging directed at victims. I take your experience seriously. I am sorry this happened to you. It was not your fault. Empathetic communication here isn't just some HR nicety. It is a formalized, institutional requirement. The playbook explicitly tells leaders to emphasize to the survivor, you are in control of your case. The entire design of this messaging is to give power right back to the victim, ensuring their voice and their views are respected above absolutely everything else.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 4, Tips for Strategic Advocacy. It's all about planning for impact.
Okay, so we know the message and we know the audience, but how do we actually guarantee maximum impact? How do leaders champion these initiatives to change actual real-world policy? Well, the playbook lays out 5 foundational rules for advocacy. Number 1, know your objectives in advance. Preparation is quite literally everything. Number 2, unite voices. Build strong coalitions with other aid organizations and government authorities. Number 3, always use hard evidence to back up your claims. Number 4, put victims and survivors first, always. And number 5, link these specific issues to broader discussions so they never get sidelined.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how these high-level tips are executed in reality. It's not just set objectives, right? It's set smart objectives that perfectly align with the organization's overarching strategic direction. It's not just use evidence. It means explicitly pulling real data from the annual staff survey or using context-specific risk assessments to prove to the decision-makers exactly how your proposed actions are going to mitigate risks in their specific context. It's incredibly tactical.
So here's the official advocacy guide pulled directly from the playbook. I really want to highlight tip 5 down there at the bottom, link to broader discussions. The text points out that some stakeholders might just not fully grasp the scale of the issue. So what does a smart leader do? They proactively force the issue into other ongoing conversations. For example, during emergency preparedness and response planning, you make sure to incorporate these measures because, as the text plainly states, risks intensify during crises. You basically embed this protection into the very foundation of the organization's daily operations.
Honestly, if you only take away one single guiding principle from this entire explainer, make it this one. Root your advocacy in the concerns, needs, and rights of victims/survivors. That right there must remain at the absolute forefront of any effort to drive policy change. The playbook instructs leaders to collaborate closely with service providers, directly engage with victims to truly understand their perspectives, and then aggressively and passionately communicate those perspectives back up the chain to other leaders.
So we've seen exactly how top-tier global institutions structure their communication to battle secrecy, overcome systemic resistance, and ultimately protect the vulnerable. The playbook requires leaders to be wildly strategic, perfectly tailored in their messaging, and ruthlessly empathetic. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. How can you take these exact tactical communication tools and apply them to drive systemic change, safety, and real accountability in your own organization, starting today?